Hello, this is the Private Investigator Experience podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Little. Today is going to be a little different than what I've been doing because I'm going to just be talking off the top of my head and dealing with the current issues that are going on, particularly around the Las Vegas bombing incident. First, I don't know where you have noted or not, but if you've been watching the events out of New Orleans, first thing I noticed there on the first day after the FBI had come in and taken over the whole show, the resident agent in charge was a young lady, probably a little older than what she looked, kind of had a ruffled hair, looked like she'd rolled out of bed, was young looking, and there's nothing wrong with that, but she was very unprepared. The first thing she said was that this is not a terrorist event. We're not investigating a terrorist event. And they showed the picture at the same time of the ISIS flag on the vehicle. It was very clear that, I don't have any problem against women in law enforcement, and I don't have any problem against any particular races. I happen to have a daughter-in-law who is black from Jamaica, and she was an awesome prosecutor. And if this had been her doing this briefing, she would have been in charge. So it's nothing to do with that race, color, creed, male, female. We just need the best person qualified for the job, not a DEI selection. This was so apparent. I was watching Senator Kennedy John Kennedy from New Orleans. He was standing there right off to from the screen off to the left of her. And he was looking like he was coming unglued. And if you've watched John Kennedy at all, I love this guy. He is smart, got his information together. And when he talked there from the podium, he made it clear that the FBI was not going to get away this time with holding back data, not sharing, and he would do whatever it took, shake whatever trees it took to ensure this was a transparent, real investigation. And then I was watching some other reports and also some sources that I have talked to, former retired FBI people, some assistant directors. And one I saw on the show that he was asked about that, and he said, "Oh my God," something like, "My heart sank when I saw this agent in charge, supposedly, on the podium." And he said, "What has happened to the FBI that I knew?" And if you note very quickly now, there's a special assistant director out of Washington, a guy in charge, looking like an FBI agent, and he is on the scene there now as the spokesperson and in charge of the FBI investigation. It's obvious that New Orleans didn't have the law enforcement capability or the resources to do this kind of a massive investigation that's going to require international work. What happens in this is that there's so many things going around on the internet, and some facts, some not, some information, but it's been stated that he possibly made a trip to Egypt within the last year. And some thinking about that's where perhaps he's been was indoctrinated from. I mean, from some of his own writings and emails and texts and things that have been put out, he talked about being associated with ISIS before the first of the summer, sometime in the spring. So that could be proved to be factual. But all these things have to be checked out. And obviously, the FBI is one that has the contacts, and they have an agent at each one of these embassies. I've dealt with many of the embassies around the world when I've been traveling and investigating work and other things. And I'm part of OSAC, which is an organization that was set up in 1989. I joined in 1990, and it's a very effective State Department organization for the private sector. And we have a contact at each embassy, and sometimes it's the RSO. In the early days, it was a dedicated person for OSAC. It's been extremely effective. I've gotten amazing results and help from the RSOs and countries I've been in. I know, and I learned firsthand that the FBI have their agents there. Back in the 80s, I was in Paris at the French National Police headquarters. One of the heads there of counterterrorism and intelligence gathering was associate, a friend, longtime friend, and ran our station in Paris. And I was at the French National Police, and they said the FBI attaché from the embassy wants to meet you. And he came over and he introduced himself and he said, I've been hearing the French talk about you and all these things that are going on and you're doing and it appears that they're really helping you and with information and things. And I just wanted to meet you and find out who you are and how are you getting all this help and all these things. So they're out there and they need to be digging into all these different um, situations that will help put together the pieces on this man's life there and what happened in New Orleans. Now, we've also seen a shift. Let's go with Las Vegas. And I've had a lot of involvement with Las Vegas police over the years. Yeah, many, many years ago, when I was a young guy starting out, I was working out of Vegas, and the sheriff at that time became a friend. And I remember many dinners we had at some of the studios in Las Vegas there, and he would be treated like a royalty when we came in. They would have a table for us, and very good service, VIP service. I've been know a little bit about the department there. I'm I'm so thankful that the situation had to happen. Some ways it happened there because the sheriff is in charge. The FBI is not in charge of this investigation. And now we see both places where the FBI in New Orleans, the current person there leading the charge, and the assistant director in charge in Vegas are talking very strong about transparency, working with the locals, and it's a joint operation. Everything's going to be shared. Everybody's going to know everything. We're going to tell you as soon as we know it, as long as it doesn't affect the case and investigation. Now, pull that with, what was it, July, that our soon to be new president, former president at the time, was shot at an event in Pennsylvania. We still don't know the facts. We still don't know why this happened, what they learned from this shooter's technical and internet and computers. They raided his house, took all this stuff. Interesting. I think maybe the message has gotten through that there's going to be a new sheriff in town January the 20th. And also, as I've talked before, as I traveled the world, everywhere I would go in the world, I've been all over it working and talking to law enforcement in these local countries, no matter where I was at. Everyone would agree that the FBI was the gold standard in the world. And I've worked extensively with the FBI on cases where I took cases to them that we were working on that we needed their help on. And there were many cases that we solved that the FBI was involved in that they took the credit for. And that was great. The job got done. We got paid by our client. But in the last few years, that's all changed. Everybody is saying, what happened to that gold standard? It's more like a banana republic with what's happening in the Justice Department of the United States. So, but they're great men and women in the FBI that are fed up. Some have retired because of that. Others are there holding on now for the changes to come. But there's a top level that whatever happened, it's amazing that this could happen in our country, in America, with the freedoms that we have. And the I just integrity. Don't understand the director of the FBI. He was appointed by Trump, appeared to be a little middle of non-political guy, and uh, it's like he's been turned. You can see him being interviewed in the Senate or Congress, these hearings, he is nervous and he just seems like he's on the hot seat and doesn't like it. And do you just sense that something's not right? I don't know how it could become so corrupt so fast. So there's a level, it's more than just two or three people at the top of the FBI. There could be as many as 40 or 50 that have been brainwashed that need to go and bring it up through the ranks. These righteous men and women who are supporters of the Constitution and treat all fairly and the law is supposed to be blind. It's colorblind. It's race blind. It's gender blind. It seeks a fact. Just tell me the facts, man. Like in the old Hollywood police stories. But now we're in Vegas, and the sheriff's in charge, and he's laying it all out. But what has happened? I was talking to my close friend, former CIA, and we were discussing yesterday about this whole thing. Something just doesn't add up with this bombing incident and the person who's pulled it off. They finally confirmed that it was him. It was pretty obvious that it was the subject, Matthew Weichelsberg. But how could a guy, this kind of a man, dedicated, had awards, and he had been in uh, events around the world that would make the public duck their heads if they really knew all that was going on. He's got the top of the top secret security clearances that could lead him into any activity that's going on. He served almost 20 years. And what happened to this man? And he was a Constitution lover, American supporter. He was a Trump supporter. And it just didn't make sense. Why did all this happen? Well, things are coming out now. And as they've gotten into some of his computers and phones, they have two that they've been able to break and a couple they're still trying to get into. And they're finding that he had some personal problems. They also feel that he had PSD. I seemed to be that he was under a lot of stress and strain. And it seemed to be too that a lot of the events that he had been involved in, he was conflicted about maybe killings he had done and things that he had done and things he saw those in charge doing that wasn't right. And then things being covered up and not reported. So a lot is coming out and still yet to come out to see why did he do this? Well, it seems that he was making a statement. He wasn't out to hurt anybody, even though there were some minor injuries. Thank God there wasn't any more serious. He knew what he was doing with this vehicle explosives. And but what happened was he sent an email to a retired military intelligence officer, and it arrived on I think Saturday in his email. And when he received it, he checked out and found that it was really confirmed to his satisfaction, it was from Matthew. And and he was asking that by Matthew not to release it until after January 1. Now, I'm going to read this to you, what he was posted. I think it's that important. It tells you a little bit of the thought process of Matthew, what he was going through, and some of the concerns that he had. This will take me a few minutes to do this, but I think it's important. And the email start with this. And it was interesting that he said this. In case I did not make it to my decision point or onto the Mexican border. Now, what was his decision point? Was that Las Vegas? And then why the Mexican border? Was it possibly that he was on leave from, I think, Germany, where he was? So he wasn't AWOL. He wasn't on the run. And was he planning on maybe making some kind of a statement and then trying to disappear in Mexico? Interesting. We'll probably find out more about that. But then he goes on, I'm sending this now. Please do not release this until 1 January and keep my identity private until then. First off, I'm not under duress or hostile influence or control. My first car was a 2006 black Ford Mustang V6 for verification. What we have been seeing with drones, remember all the drones back east, is the operational use of gravitational propulsion systems powered aircraft. By most recently, China in the East Coast, but throughout history, the U.S. and only we in China have this capability. Now, remember, this man's clearance, this man's level of information that he has access to in the U.S. government. And he goes on after saying U.S. and China are the only ones that have this capability. China has been launching them from the Atlantic from submarines for years, but this activity recently has picked up. As of now, it's just a show of force, and they are using it similar to how they use the balloons for Signet and ISR, which are also part of the integrated comms system. Now, these are statements and talking about information that military people would know and that the Army and military uses. There are dozens of these balloons in the air at any given time. This so what? Then he goes on to say, the so what is because of the speed and stealth of these balloons in the air at any given time. Remember, there, if you were following that and have been following that, and my investigation was showing one instance where a police helicopter went up to try to find out what it was, and it suddenly just shot off and took off. And there's been sightings and camera shots that show this excessive speed, and it's logical. I was in the Air Force, and I spent time in various functions, and I spent time at Edwards Air Force Base, which was a proving ground testing. And at nighttime, there would be all kinds of vehicles flying out of there. Some of them look like flying saucers. And I know I was over at George Air Force Base close by, and we would have these things coming over at night, and they would be stopping and hovering over the runway and then shoot off in all directions. And of course, the public at that time was making calls. They were seeing these things, and oh, of course, it was all no, it's your imagination. It's just a helicopter. It's a yeah, and we were sitting there laughing. Of course, we knew what it was. So that was back in the 60s, early 60s. So we know that technology's been out there. And he goes on to say, it's because of the speed and stealth of these unmanned AC. They are the most dangerous threat, Matthew goes on to say, to national security that has ever existed. They basically have an unlimited payroll capacity and park it over the White House if they wanted to. It's checkmate. USG needs to give the history of this, how we are employing and weaponizing it, how China is employing them, and what the way forward is. China is poised to attack anywhere in the East Coast. I've been followed for over a week now from likely Homeland or FBI, and they are looking to move on me, and they're unlikely to let me cross into Mexico. But they won't because they know I am armed and have a massive VBAD. The person who got this email had talked to the FBI, and when he said VBAD, the FBI just said, "What's that?" And of course, if you've been around the military, that's in layman's terms a bomb. It's a vehicle embedded bomb, like the IEDs that are stationed along the roads and whatever. And so he had massive explosive in that Tesla. And thank God he chose a Tesla instead of blowing apart and maybe injuring or killing people or knocking out the front of the Trump Hotel. Tesla vehicle, thank you, Elon Musk, just shot the explosion all the way up. So that was because and due to the less damaged. I've been trying to maintain a very visible profile, Matthew goes on to say, and have kept my phone and they are definitely digitally tracking me. I have knowledge of this program and also war crimes that were covered up during airstrikes in Nemrez province in Afghanistan in 2019 by the administration, DOD, DEA, CIA. I conducted targeting for these strikes of over 125 buildings. He was there. He was in the middle of it. This is firsthand account from him, not hearsay or from some third party. 65 were struck because of CIVCAS that killed hundreds of civilians in a single day. USFORA confirmed continued strikes after spotting civilians on an initial ISR. It was supposed to take 6 minutes and scramble all aircraft and CENTCOM. The UN basically called these war crimes, but the administration made them disappear. I was part of that cover up with USFORA, an agent of the DEA, name not here. So I don't know if my abduction attempt is related to either. I worked with General Milley's IO staff on this as well as a response to Bala Murghab, Murghab. That's not my best language there. And he goes on to say, an OBS commander at the time can validate this. You need to evaluate, you need to elevate this to the media so we can avoid a world war because this is a mutually assured destruction situation. He goes on to say, for vetting, my LinkedIn is Matt Berg or Matthew Leivelsberg, active duty 18Z out of I-10. My profile is public. I have an active TSSCI with a UAP and a USAP access. Those are top secret security clearances where he could be read in to the most top secret events. Now, it appears like that Matthew knew that he was fighting City Hall. Maybe he was thinking about, well, could he become a whistleblower? Could he some way get this out and survive? He was active military. And it's very possible that he was having issues involved with PSD and other events. But it seems too that he was feeling the weight of that killing of all those civilians in Afghanistan and others that he was part of. And then he would see it covered up. So we don't know totally, but we'll probably know a lot more. And it's obvious that from the sheriff, Metropolitan Police Department in Las Vegas, that everything's going to come out. It's not going to be anything hidden this time. It's not going to be a cover up. And I suspect when the new FBI director gets there, we will be hearing a whole lot more about a whole lot more things that, for whatever reason, has been kept from the American public. Now, what do we do? What can we do? Like we read this saying, and of course, we hear about, a third world war. And I would say, yeah, I've been hearing about that for years. We were going to have a nuclear war in the 70s, 80s with Russia. And we get so busy with our lives and so involved with just surviving and with all the stuff we've gone through since 2020 and the massive inflation. People have to work 2 or 3 jobs just trying to pay for food and rent and take care of their kids and school and buy gas. So what's 2025 going to be like and how can it be different? Well, one, we have a new administration coming in. And that's why it's so important. And I think the Republican senators have gotten this. American people have had enough. And if there's a few of those senators that don't like Trump for some reason, they better line up And the American people said, we want Trump and we want his people there. So it's important that these key positions, such as Attorney General and FBI, defense, and a lot of these others, that new blood is brought in. People that aren't going to be bought off and fall into the status quo. And folks, the deep state is there. I've been in the middle of Washington in some things after I built a private intelligence network out around the world, had stations out around the world, starting in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I built up this network and service before its time. What would happen in the 1980s when terrorist attacks would go off in Europe? And one day, the big day in Paris was 12 bombs went off. And that's what really turned it around. And the people in Paris and the citizens of France rose up and they demanded that their government strike against terrorists. And that started a cleaning up at that point. Now, of course, we've seen it get worse with what's happened with the immigration infiltration there in Europe. But after those events, my phone would ring. And our headquarters in Los Angeles, off the hook. Companies saying, "Okay, we got worries. What can we do? What do we need to do?" And I would lay out some plans for them, because I was very involved in counterterrorism at the time. I was speaking all over the country on counterterrorism and intelligence gathering and how to prevent problems in a positive way, talking about, yes, we have potential problems coming, but we can do something about it. And invariably, after about 6, 8 weeks, they died down from all of the newness of the attacks, and they would not do anything. And this was a cycle. It happened all through the 80s up into the 90s. And so I think in 2025, yes, we have a lot of positives going. I see it everywhere. I'm sure you do too. Go to the stores, wherever you go and talk, Democrats, Republicans. Uh, I mean, talk about mainstream Democrats, not the radical lefts. Hey, we got radicals on the right, way out there, radicals on the left. That's not what we're dealing with. 90% of the voting public and the people in America are in this center left, center right, where they realize that to run a government, to run a country, there has to be some compromise. But we don't compromise our our constitutional rights that are enshrined there. And as an example, I was amazed. Congresswoman was on last night talking about things that was in this current congressional rules committee. They have their rules they set up, and they have to vote on it, I guess, every Congress. And in that, so they were going to vote on this time and how speaker allowed this, I'm not really sure, but it still had all those gender things in there. And it had the DEI that Nancy Pelosi had set up, a department of DEI with massive budgets being spent, and an inspector general who was the DEI inspector general in the Congress, part of it, and all the names that couldn't be used there. Not man, woman, husband, wife, aunt, uncle. It was all these woke names. Well, she found that she said, "Guys, I'm not voting on this, and I'm going to expose all this if it's not changed." And it's all gone now. It went back to man, woman, boy, girl. Yes, there's two genders. And it went back to the whole DEI was eliminated. Well, that has to happen in the military, has to happen FBI, the Secret Service, and all down through the government in the U.S. Now, what can we do to help out those that we sent to Washington? Well, we can stay informed. There's so much information out there, just like this information that gets out there. And if we do some research, maybe set up one time a month, set up an hour a month that you get on your computer and you check out what's going on in my local community. What's my school board doing? What are what are the events? What if there is this CRT and and all of the gender things that they're trying to teach our kindergarten about sexual explicit things. That's going to be out there. If you search these things out on the internet, you'll find out if something's going on in your local community. If a school board write letters, show up and testify, and I guarantee you there won't be any FBI division going after current terrorists who are showing up at school board meetings to protest and have their voice heard about what's being taught to their children. I guarantee you that's going to be gone. And the FBI is going to be back to be doing the work that it was set up to do. That's investigating criminals and keeping our streets safe and being preventive. So then, if you find something in your local city council or your local um, area that's going on, get involved. Let your voice be heard. Voices do make a difference. I remember back in the early 80s, I was speaking a lot on counterterrorism. And prior to the Olympics in 1984 in Los Angeles, I had gone with a group of law enforcement people to Europe. We called it the Interpol Connection, and we started in England, went to France, Germany, Italy, visited all of the Scotland Yard and in France, the French National Police and their events and what was going on around terrorism. And then in Germany, we focused on the Munich games in '72 and how that attacks happened, what they had learned. We met with GSG 9, which the then co-founder of GSG 9, Lemmy Weigold, started working for me as a source. And then when he retired, he became head of our German station. And we learned about how to prevent terrorist attacks at the Olympics in 1984, and it worked out pretty well. Well, as I was talking about terrorism intelligence gathering, I was involved with LAPD and the brass at that time. Daryl Gates was the chief. Bob Vernon was the assistant chief. Mike Croker was deputy chief, and they had a organization, or their intelligence group was called PDID, and they got under attacks by the ACLU that they were going to shut them down. They were spying on the public, and they were going before the city council testifying that yes, it's not needed. It's spying on the public. They're violating citizens' rights. And it was Bob Vernon that talked to me about could I get involved in speaking out against this? And when we talked to some of the city council members, we learned that the first one told me, he said, well, where have you people been? The only people that have been in here testifying have been the ACLU or related that we don't need PDID, that it's all spying on the public. We haven't heard anything else. And so we got the message. A number of us formed an organization, Concerned Citizens for Los Angeles. We called a press conference, laid out the facts of what was going on, and we needed help. And within a short time, we had thousands of people that rose up, got involved, and we stopped the disbanding of the PDID. Yes, we can make a difference if we find out the fact and then are willing to step out of the crowd and get involved. Also, during that time frame, I learned what can happen when you go in the lion's den. Well, it was kind of like Daniel in the lion's den. I had been invited to debate the head of the ACLU in Los Angeles at UCLA in one of their events. And it was, I don't know, there's probably 100 people there, all ACLU. And here I was, this young, I was a kid at the time, and not, I wasn't a professional debater. I had never had that in school. I grew up in Missouri on a farm. I went to a one-room schoolhouse for the first 8 years and to Chillicothe High School, which was, I don't know, we had 800 or 900 people, I guess, in the high school. So had been exposed to this thing. Then into the Air Force, then on into law enforcement and intelligence service. And so I just went there and I told them the facts. I laid out the facts. I wasn't a Republican. I wasn't a conservative. I wasn't anything. I'd had all kinds of organizations there in Los Angeles try to get me to sign up with them. and become one of the surrogate speakers, but they were sometimes on the fringe of radical groups, and I didn't want to get tainted by that. And as I laid out why we had a need for PDID, why and how it was protecting the citizens, and it wasn't spying on citizens illegally, and they had laws and rules that if a PDI person broke the law or the rules, they could be dealt with. There was plenty of vehicles there to do that. When that meeting was over, it was about an hour and a half or 2 hours, whatever it was. It was a long time I spent at that time, but it felt good after. I had 95% of the ACLU there support me. I had them talking to me afterwards, and they said, "Wow, that's the best presentation we've ever heard. We haven't ever heard anything from the other side. It makes sense." And so your voice can make a difference. If you deal with the facts unemotionally, it's kind of like a woman I just love, Tulsi Gabbard. That woman is so polished, so unruffled, and she knows her stuff. She knows what she's talking about. She's ex-military. She's well, still involved as a reserve colonel, and been on the battlefield. And she just calmly, you know, just puts people's shuts their mouths. I wished I had that ability all the time. But remember, walk softly, and carry a big stick. Just know when to use it and when not to use it. But we get the best response out of people when we just are factual, not having an agenda that we're trying to change somebody's mind to believe like we do or like an organization we might be in. So I found out during that time that one could make a difference. So 2025, we need to be alert. Now the war hasn't been won. We won a battle in November. We won a battle. The American people finally had had enough. I remember my friend at the French National Police, who was a close friend and ran our operation there. He said, "Phil, the best thing that happens in France when the socialists get in, they screw up so bad and mess up the country that people kick them out, and they don't get in for another 50 years when the public has kind of forgot what they were." So, so remember, they're going to be coming back. They're still going to be out there. They're not going to let up on attacks on trying to take away our freedoms or attacks on President Trump or others in administration. And it's time that we forget about political parties. Yes, we have to vote with one party or the other if we're going to vote. But we don't have to be a dogmatic, brainwashed supporter of Republicans or Democrats or Libertarian or anything else. We should be open to what is best for our nation. And remember what I said is that there's going to have to be some compromise. Now, I am for helping people that need help. I I've done that. I've been there. But I don't believe in giving handouts. I believe we should give hands up. In fact, if you recall back in the 90s, Bill Clinton was a master at playing like he was a Republican. And his run for election on the second term, he would have thought he was a moderate Republican. But he also learned that when the Congress was stacked against him, he joined them. And they passed the welfare bill that reformed welfare and got millions of people off of welfare. Is the welfare they worked? They had to get training. They couldn't just live on welfare and become recipients of handouts. What a difference that made. Now that was when Democrats and Republicans, and Bill Clinton was the one that signed that into law. So let's go back to the time when we look at what's best for the country and say, okay, I'm listening to you. You've got a good point there. And I'm going to support that because it makes sense for our country. It's like some of the Democratic congressmen now or senators are saying, Well, why wouldn't we be? Shouldn't we be for cutting costs and cutting out waste? And no matter if it is Trump wanting and his team wanting to do it, if it's good for the country, we should all be supporting it. So that is something that I think we need to have a change of mind. And this is going to take education. It's going to take us taking time to put aside our own prejudice. And the real problem is a lack of knowledge. The reason that people blindly follow their party is because they're uninformed. They're uneducated about what the facts really are. And if you listen to a leftist leaning press or shows, you're going to have a leftist leaning viewpoint if that's all you get. So we need to be, and the same thing on the right. We don't want to be so dogmatic about conservative issues that if we have someone that's out of line on the conservative side, we need to call them out. And and if there are people on the Republican or conservative side that say, "Oh, we don't need any help for people. We shouldn't have that. It's a waste of money." Well, we know that's not right. So we need to come together and agree on things that are for the good of the country. Yeah, there's always going to be issues that we have different ideas on of how to solve it. And but the leftists, the radicals want to take away our whole freedom and way of life. But also they are wanting to have total control and not just compromise, but have the government running every aspect of our lives. And I think the biggest thing we need to now continue on with too, as is thinking of 2025, is we're back to schools. In Oklahoma, they have passed a law that the Bible will be back taught in schools. And there are other states that are following up with prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance are back. Well, we need to push for that in our cities and states if that's not already. Because when you look at the downfall of the US and their society, we can go back to right to the time years ago when we started taking biblical views, godly views, the Ten Commandments, moral principles, whether it be on the right life, whether it be on what our children are taught. Do you realize that your children in many schools aren't even being taught history, the real history? They've rewritten textbooks that have a whole purported this they liars. They changed history. They've made our founding fathers look like racist slave owners and ungodly people when every one of those men that were involved in the building of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, or whatever, most of them were committed followers of God. There were some that were more deists, but they believed in God. But Benjamin Franklin, he was one that wasn't this biblical scholar, but he was promoting concepts from the Bible be put in the Constitution. Our children aren't being taught that. They're being taught that we are this bad country that has white privilege. Oh man, that man, you want to run from that stuff fast as you can, but make sure your children aren't being taught that. They're being taught through history. Fight to get textbooks back in your schools if they're not there. And the best thing you can do is put school board members in that believe in our uh, Constitution, believe in our Bill of Rights, believe in the biblical worldview that every one of those founders had. And when you look back on our history, it was back to starting, well, even before the nation was founded. They were using the Bible primers and other books were based on the Bible. That's what they were teaching the school. That's how they taught English or math and other topics. And it was about the 18th when the change started shifting. Now, up until that time, and I've done some deep diving into the um, founding of our nation, whatever. I'd forgotten a lot of this stuff and haven't even heard. And I was amazed when I realized that Harvard, Yale, Princeton, these old universities were Christian institutions. Harvard was taught was founded to train ministers and people in righteousness, and the Bible was a founding document they used to teach and train how we should live our lives. And even in law, it was in about 1850s around there. I don't remember exact dates that the new head of Harvard came in. And up until then, it had been godly men who had been looked at the world with a biblical worldview. And he's decided, he was an atheist, and he decided that we didn't need to have the Bible, it shouldn't be there. And he then started taking it out. He brought in as head of the law department another atheist, and they moved away from the principles and the teaching methods that had been there based on biblical views. And that started the downturn in our education society. And then it spread out through Princeton and all the other universities. And have we seen that in recent times? And I just had forgotten that. It was Dewey, but started bringing uh, godless things into the school systems. And the theory was with these people that man was smarter than God, and man could figure out and had to figure out the future, how to live, how to work. And it took over the years, and it kept progressing little by little by little up around the 1900s. Well, Wilson was one president that was a promoter of that and helped speed it along. And did you know that for the first 180 or so years or more, there wasn't an income tax in the US? I'll bet you most of you didn't even know that. Because I had forgotten that. I don't even remember hearing that. And in fact, it was unconstitutional to have an income tax. And the revenue of the United States, the majority of the revenue came from tariffs and sales tax. Can you believe that? And it started then in around the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I've lost the man's name right now, forgive me, that started this that we needed an income tax to be able to support the government. And we can look at history of that last 125 years or so. And then during Roosevelt's time, they just went hog wild on raising taxes. And so they've had a piggy bank. Now, Donald Trump, again, is advocating for the abolishment of the income tax. I mean, this will be a war. This will be a fight. And there are forces in Washington that don't want anything to do with eliminating taxing because when the left gets in control, as they did with the trillions in our debt, that without the taxing, they would be at a loss to try to promote their causes, which ultimately is to take over the U.S. government and turn it into more of a government controlled society or totalitarianship. So be alert for that. That's one thing to be alert on. You're going to hear all kinds of reasons why it won't work. Well, it worked for a couple hundred years, and I guarantee it would work again. And we need to be supporting issues like that. And in fact, the uh, charts I've seen not only would take care of everything that our government needs, but would give us a way to start eliminating and reducing the debt and ultimately getting handling this $37 trillion debt, which to most of us, to me, I say, how's it possible to dig out from under this hole? Well, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independent, we need to start listening and being open to ideas. And if it means going back, there's nothing wrong with that. I think most of us think is, well, if you're standing still, you're really going backwards. So you don't look backwards. Those are old things. Don't deal with those. Let's do some new things. Well, I think it's time that we in this country started saying, let's rewrite what people say you're supposed to do. Let's go back. Let's look at what was working and let's figure out if it won't work again. So there's issues like that that are extremely critical to us now in 2025. So well, I think we're going to see inflation go down quickly. We'll see food costs go down, and that's a difficult thing. Remember during 2020 when prices got and products got low in stock, prices started going up. The only trouble is when things started leveling out, the prices never went back down. And that's always the danger we have with these events is how do we get prices back down? It's only if we, the stockholders in America, we, the citizens who are supposed to control this society, and it's getting back to what John Kennedy said to the FBI and others there in New Orleans. We are going to get answers. We are going to have truth. We are going to have transparency, or there's going to be hell to pay, he said. And so it's time we, the people, now have this opportunity to rise up and push back against what has been going on, particularly these last 4 years, and become part of the difference. Not just sitting on the sidelines, not just a spectator, but get involved. One still can make a difference. I learned a lot about how government works as I'd been involved in government contracting and around various things over all the years, ever since I had West Coast detectives. And they could be military, they could be Homeland Security, they could be various different things. Well, after building the private intelligence operation around the world where we had reports coming in and yeah, I had political stuff. I didn't mandate. That wasn't the tasking. I didn't task the agents out around the world. Oh, tell me everything that's going on political. But we needed that because if I was going to recommend to a country, oh yeah, it's safe for you to go into this country and set up, we needed to know what was and what is the political stability of the country. What are the politicians thinking? One, do they like Americans, American business? Is there a likelihood that if a company's set up in 5 years or whatever, they could be nationalized and taken over? Were they going to be tightening up in freedom that you might have? Was it safe for Americans to take their families there? So we wanted to find out about that, and so I would get all this political stuff. I would get information they would never tell the U.S. and they weren't sharing with the U.S. because they were afraid of freedom of information. I had so many government and intelligence officials tell me when I was meeting with them, they said, "We're not sharing this with your government." because with your loose lips and leaky floors there and your Freedom of Information Act, we're liable to be exposed. But they would tell me those things because they knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. And if I told them it wasn't going anywhere. So I had some resources, and after 9/11, I was approached and heard something like your country needs you. And so I looked at how could I get involved with what I had built to help keep America safe. And we know right about that 9/11, right after it, it was chaotic. Nobody knew what was really going on, what was going to happen, and we were moving into uncharted territories. And the problem was the U.S., and I learned this firsthand, going back to Washington and being in agencies there, I was amazed at what they didn't have, what they didn't know. It was the LA Times, New York Times, was reporting on this, and I thought, oh, that's just press jargon. And I discovered that they didn't know because it had become such a bureaucratic maze that they had forgotten about the mission and about human human assets and intelligence gathering. Much more important than satellite. Satellite can't go inside a small group of people and have conversations and meetings and become trusted and get involved. So I got involved and we were working jointly. And the mission was to stop terrorists before they got to the United States. And because of the way I was operating, I had a lot of freedom. And we didn't have a particular country or station or someplace where we were meeting. We had a world mandate. If something was going on in the world where there could be exposure to the United States, then we had the mission authority to go find out and try to head it off. And over the next years, there was a lot of traveling. There was a lot of running around the world. There was a lot of using relationships I had and building new relationships. I was out in the Middle East. I started my counterterrorism and intelligence career in northern Israel, southern Lebanon. I was on the border out of Matula when it was a little bitty burg. I had a 50-room hotel there that we stayed in. And the rumor was that at any one time it was half full of spies that were trying to keep track of what was going on across the border and into southern Lebanon. At that time, there was a fence there called the Good Fence. And most people probably listening to this don't even know what it is. But the Good Fence was set up by the Israelis and Lebanese people, either soldiers wounded or just mothers with children or people that had medical needs. They could come to that fence every day, and the fence would be open. They would be allowed into Israel to go to the hospital to get medical care. And that was those bad Israelis, supposedly lording it over everybody. They were the ones helping the Lebanese, and they were Christian, mostly Christian Lebanese on that southern border. And in fact, the group I was involved with there, we had a meeting with Prime Minister Begin at the time, and he told us. He said, "Hey, there's these Christians in southern Lebanon that are being slaughtered by the PLO and terrorists, and the Israelis, the Jews, are the only one helping them. Where are the Christians of North America and Canada and the U.S.?" And he said, "Go up. I want you to go up to southern Lebanon and see what's going on." And we did. And my first book, Hostile Intent, which is here someplace, came from the first meeting. Hostile Intent was my search for terrorism and for trying to find out where it came from. Where did it all start? So my background started there, And I saw the Israelis in operation. I was there on June 6th, 1982, when the Israelis rolled through the fence and went north to take Mosul Castle, which was shelling every night in Israel. I was on the northern front there and in the commander's home and setting around, and it was eerie. It was something like out of a movie. There were machine guns and Uzis, everything stacked, standing up, people huddled around talking. Overhead, missiles were flying in to northern Israel, and radios were going off chattering. And it was something like surreal. And even though I'd been in the military and done some things, this was it was an amazing experience getting involved and seeing firsthand what was going on. And so when I got involved in Washington, it was tongue in cheek. I knew the potential. I realized I found out right really, really fast that the agencies were very political. I was surprised. I learned that we had dropped the ball with human intelligence gathering, and I believe that has happened again. So in 2025, we individuals need to become our own intelligence agents, our own investigators. Find out what's going on around you and your communities around you. Then get involved. And I remember the first time I went to Interpol in 1982, I was expecting some sci-fi high-end spy operation. And so it was interesting too. The time I was there, that time, it was the release of the new, the wine. I just lost the name of it. I don't want to call it Monster Show. It wasn't, it was the show, the new crop. And the whole buzz was, oh, let's go over to the cafeteria and cantina and let's sample the wine. This is Interpol. It's saving the world. What is going on here? And so they showed me the intelligence gathering room. And I went into this room. Of course, this was before the age of computers, I guess. But as far as I could see, there was these big stacks of tubs, round tubs, and they would roll inside, you know, and in there were index cards. That was the intelligence files. And on these index cards was scribbled notes of, oh, and I thought, oh my goodness. No wonder it takes so long if you ask to get something out of Interpol. So my experience, though, in the government and doing what we did and having the latitude that I had, I wasn't, I was somewhat affected by politics, but not like it would have been with somebody on the deep inside. We were able, the great thing was the ability to go out and solve a problem and stop something from happening here in the United States. That was amazing. Forget politics, put all that aside. That made it worthwhile what I did for all those years. And so we need to get our antennas up, get alerts. Let's get involved. I'll be putting out more, and we'll be hearing a whole lot more about the Las Vegas and the New Orleans caper. And so be alert, be aware, get involved, put your antennas up, keep looking out. And thank you so much for sharing and liking, subscribing. And you know the drill. Hit the notification bell. We've had a large number of subscribers in the last week, and we so appreciate that because we want to make a better product. We want to get some more bells and whistles. And, I just started this last year without, I've done a lot of television. I've done a lot of television shows. I've been in front of the camera, though, not behind the camera, and published books. And I'm not a technical person. And I thought, how can I do this? And I learned it's so easy to start a podcast. Guys, start your own podcast. Start broadcasting what's going on in your community. Get the word out. You've got editing locations like Descript, which I'm on. You've got places like Buzzsprout and others, which post all my podcasts to all of the podcasts just with one click. And then the you post right from my descript program to YouTube channel. Hey, it's easy. So get involved, do your podcast. I used to tell people, they'd say, well, I can't write a book. My books would be talking about. I said, you've got a book in you. Now I'm going to tell you, you've got a podcast in you. Go make it happen. I, I, I said I would never do it. I didn't know how to do it, but here I am. So I just want to thank you all. Hey, leave any comments, suggestions, ideas, what you'd like to see or hear about, and if you happen to be one that might have a problem. I've had people tell me over the years, I wished I'd known you a year ago because I had this problem and I didn't know a PI could help me. Maybe you've got a situation in your life, business, or family, and you would like to find out, could PI help me? Well, send me that to my email, little PI 777 at gmail.com. And then I'll get back to you with the solutions or some ideas of what you could do. And remember, on any of the podcast platforms, leave that information, comments, and again, the email, little PI 777 at gmail.com. May God bless you. May God bless your family. And may God bless America. And I'm excited about 2025. Let's go together, make it a success. See you next time.